Hi, Doug.
Hey, Milena, it's great to be here.
Welcome to the Unhustle Podcast. Wow, technical difficulties to begin with this show with, but now that we're here.
It's all good. I'm regenerating even as we speak. Thank you.
That's why we like to do what we do, right? Every once in a while, we got to step outside of the office and connect in real life.
That's right. I love it.
So I'm very intrigued. I'm super stoked to connect with you today, and I want to hear and learn everything about sabbatical. So what is sabbatical? What does it mean? And how did you come up with the idea? That's three questions loaded up into one.
All right. That's good. I like the efficiency, Milena. First of all, I want to say, I'm super excited to be engaging with you and the kind of unhustle movement that you're driving. I think that there are a whole bunch of different affinity businesses that are forming or have been forming over the last year, 2.5, 3 years. And Sabatigo comes sort of as a family member to that group. What we are is the concept of a really intensive and bespoke regeneration, which, given what we know about burnout right now and how depleted our human capital resources are across all different kinds of corporations, I think the moment is here. It's here for Unhustle. It's here for Sabatigo. And our concept is essentially to disrupt the old model of the sabbatical and create a smaller format, more compressed in time, but very mindfully and intentionally curated so that our travelers, our sabbatigoers, can regain their edge and their energy and their connection and their passion over the course of one of our journeys. And right now, what we're strategizing are journeys that will last 2 weeks in length and take our lucky sabbatigoers on a regeneration voyage that will have 1 week in Paris, 1 week in Berlin, and then they'll come home using our toolkits, Milena, to continue their own journey once they return to their normal lives at home.
I'm in. When are we going?
Well, our first journey is set for November, and we want Unhustle engaged. I've joked with you that Sabatigo can be partly powered by Unhustle because we are such affinity kinds of projects. So yeah, we're starting in November on the 6th in Paris with a small group of beta travelers who are coming for our kind of pilot launch. And then we'll be back with a vengeance in Europe in April after we've had a chance to do some of the necessary editing that the pilot will certainly produce.
Awesome. I love it. How did you come up with the idea, and what does the name mean?
Thanks for asking that. It comes from a kind of slightly brutalized version of the Portuguese or Spanish of sabbatical. And we brought it around as this idea of kind of a mini diminutive short sabbatical. Because let's face it, you and I both want to do a year-long sabbatical. But lives don't allow for that, A. And the other thing we found as we started kind of shopping our idea around is that even super forward-thinking big companies in many cases have abandoned the HR benefit of a sabbatical. Why? Because people left for too long. They got too disengaged. They went too native or too local, or they just looked for jobs and ended up never coming back. So Sabatigo is meant to be a compressed small thing, and that's sort of where our name came from. It's meant to be playful and kind of hint at the regenerative power that travel can have. And believe me, I think you would agree. Travel, in our experience, absolutely is a massive reboot moment and experience.
Doug, I don't know if you know my story about how I started on Hustle, but it was actually the aha moment was during a 10-day sabbatical.
Uh-huh.
And so I can definitely testify to the rejuvenation aspect of shifting perspectives and getting outside of the office and being able to reconnect with your soul and yourself and finding a deeper purpose. Have you done a sabbatical experience yourself?
I have. In fact, I've been a professor for most of the last 25 years. So I've had actual formal academic sabbaticals twice. And on one of those experiences, I wrote my first major book with the University of Chicago Press, which was on burnout and medicine. And it's called Leisure Settings, and it's published by the University of Chicago Press.
What year was that in?
That was a long time ago, Milena. It was 1998 when I published that book. And that's how long I've been working on this field of burnout and regeneration. My piece was essentially to look back at history and look in like the 19th century and the origins of the modern middle class and explore what were the first examples of people coming into a doctor and saying like, I feel stressed, I feel exhausted, I'm not performing as well on my job or at home. And that early history of burnout is really located in like the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. And the first treatments were super holistic. People who had these symptoms were sent off to health spas. So my book is all about the rise of the kind of early leisure industry, doctors, and these holistic cures for the first ever modern expressions of burnout. So I've been on this for a long time. So that was sabbatical number 1. Sabbatical number 2 is also related to the business of Sabatigo. Because with that second sabbatical, what I did, Milena, was work with a whole bunch of universities all around the country and develop this state-of-the-art, brand new kind of global study program for university students and their professors. We called it the Abbey. And we located this incredible program in a 1,000-year-old Benedictine monastery in the heart of France's Loire Valley. And into that place, in that tiny little town, we took over 1,000 students over the course of a decade, almost a decade and a half. And what we did with our courses, with our intensive immersive learning, with all the lectures and teaching that we did in the streets and the villages and the vineyards, we changed these people's lives. And I developed that program during my second sabbatical. And what I did then was run that program and spin it off into different study abroad programs. And essentially that kind of feeling of teaching people and mentoring them in real settings where history took place and innovation happened. And the moment to be mindful and really present is so all over the place and right in front of our clients, our students. That's what my career became. And so I continued being a professor, but really what I did was develop that Abbey program and then the other programs, including the huge juggernaut program I run now called The Catalyst. All of that kind of study abroad fervor came to a head and developed into like these massive global programs because of my own time that I took on my sabbatical. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I found them to be super, super important to me in terms of being innovative and reconnecting to my best energy.
You're obviously very passionate about it, and it shows, right? It comes through. What interested you in exploring the topic of burnout in the first place? Did you have your own experience with it?
At that time, I really didn't. At that time, I was, just young and eager. I was a PhD student at UC Berkeley working with some of the absolute top young historians in the whole world were in my PhD cohort at Cal. And we had these amazing, amazing faculty teaching us every single day. So I didn't have burnout, but I had a set of questions about like, what were the kind of tension points for the emerging middle class, or as the French call the middle class, the sort of bourgeoisie? What were the tension points? That, it wasn't just some pastoral walk out of the farm into the factory and into management where people don't, get dirt on their hands and run into trouble. There are all these tension points. And I found this question of stress and work-oriented stress to be a fascinating one, and particularly the kind of gender dynamic around it, Milena. Because when these first men come walking into their doctors saying like, I can't sleep, be quiet about this, but I'm impotent, I can't focus at work, I find myself crying at times. I mean, these are men walking into male physicians, and the physicians are looking at them saying, There is no diagnosis for what you're talking about. You could be a hypochondriac, a person with hypochondriasis, maybe. You could be like, you've got this female thing almost of hysteria, but we don't even have a word for what these men are talking about as their experience. And there certainly is no word like burnout. So it just fascinated me, this kind of moment of origin, like the genesis of this part of modern life. It's work stress. And it also fascinated a ton of others back in that period, like the fathers of sociology, like Emil Durkheim. I mean, Durkheim and others in the 1880s, 90s, and around that period are looking at work stress and finding something that's just terrible. I mean, young men in droves are killing themselves. And it's one of the reasons why Durkheim's seminal work, just called Suicide, is this call to arms to doctors and to others in the period to take seriously the fact that this is not some boutique affectation kind of condition. This really is cutting young men down. So the diagnosis of hysteria doesn't work because hysteria is a female kind of condition in this period. They create a new diagnosis that comes to be called neurasthenia. And neurasthenia eventually morphs into work stress, work fatigue, and all kinds of other things. I just was interested in the beginning of this. So that's what my book is about. The startling thing, Milena, is how very little, many of these issues I looked at first being voiced in medical literature in the 1860s, how much they sound exactly like what we hear today when our Sabatigo survey respondents come clean and tell us what their burnout is doing to them and how they're experiencing it. It's almost like the language has been lifted from the wilted pages of history, and I'm not exaggerating.
So have we learned anything in all these years, and are we treating it in a different way?
I think we have learned a lot, actually. I think we've learned the power of self-efficacy. Our young tennis star from Japan has learned what happens and what it means to say, I'm putting my mental wellness ahead of a game that's very lucrative to me and that I love with all my heart. But we've learned the power of our own voice and to say that I have mental wellness issues. I can't tell you the number of people I talk to, Milena, because of the platform that Sabatigo is giving me, not because of my work, as a research scholar, but really Sabatigo. People come to me now with burnout stories. And what I hear time and time again is that they can't solve their burnout issues and stay in the same work context, but they can solve them by finding a voice that says, I have to recover my sense of wonder, my sense of agency, my sense of perspective and mindfulness, and my sense of ownership over my own narrative, my own story. That kind of efficacy that we see today, young people talk openly, and thank God they do, about mental wellness and about their needs. Those conversations were impossible back in the era, of my major research. And indeed, those conversations weren't even possible largely, even 15 years ago, certainly not 25 or 30 years ago. So at least on the issue of efficacy and being able to talk about mental illness and mental wellness, we've made progress.
Mm-hmm. I hope we have.
There's reason for skepticism. I think I've talked to so many people who will say to me that they know they're burned out. They know they can't engage professionally with the passion that they expect of themselves and their employers need, but they can't get back to good if they stay in the context they're in. Mm-hmm. So part of what Sabatigo is about, Milena, we think it's possible for our Sabatigoers to get back to good without having to leave their profession or even the job that's driving them down. What they need is to get that backpack on, that suitcase pulled behind them, and they need the power of new and of discovery and exploration. And that feeling of, traipsing through a great city, unpacking your things in a gorgeous hotel where you're going to be planted for a week, and then doing what we're going to ask them to do every day with our mindfulness pathway, with our perspective learning, and with all the elements of innovation, entrepreneurship, and growth mindset Sabatigo is going to tee up. We believe that those people are going to leave their jobs if they don't do this, because that's what our research tells us they're planning to do.
Right.
If they do the journey and they reconnect to themselves, then they're way less likely to pull the ripcord and just throw the whole thing, throw it all up in the air and start over in a new career. Our lesson and the teaching we hope to give our sabbaticals is really simple. The easiest thing is to change. The easiest thing is to quit. But if you keep quitting and you keep cycling through jobs every 2-3 years because there's something new and attractive or better benefits or more money or whatever, that's fine. But at a certain point, there's a payday from that because you haven't engaged. You haven't built relationships. You don't have that continuity that 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the same company and the same set of teams can give people. It's a feeling of belonging that's lost if we always flip the lever that says, you know what, I'm so out of here. I'm gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the return on investment from taking a 2-week trip that can potentially change your life instead of changing your career or looking for another job could be exponential. I think you're onto something.
Well, I really appreciate that. And, again, we've done most of the disruptors who work on Sabatigo are super high-powered, accomplished scholars and business leaders. Virtually everybody who works as a disruptor with Sabatigo has led a major company, owns their own business, is a published author a few times over. So none of us is new to this regeneration story. And also, this is a super important point. None of us is new to the challenge and dynamism and growth that comes from escalation and enrichment. It's one thing to, regenerate people, which we believe Sabatigo is going to do through our mindfulness exercises, through just being abroad, through, being away from the stressors and triggers of everyday life. But it's another thing altogether to simultaneously achieve talent escalation and enrichment. And that's where we think we have something really amazing dialed in. Because together with me, we have an amazing team of super passionate and connected disruptors, really second to none. And these folks are going to take the Sabatigo escalation principle and our enrichment ideas to the streets of these amazing cities so that we're talking and walking on what we call wonder walks all over Paris for a week, all over Berlin for a week. And you said it yourself. The value of this, look, we talk all the time about things like, what does success look like for you? What constitutes a successful life? Those are all super important conversations, Milena. But let's throw a wrench at that for a second. What does change look like for you? What does life change look like? Does it mean changing apartments or, getting an Airstream in Baja or having one in northern Minnesota like I do? Maybe. I think that's tangible and I think it's great. But life change also is about mindset. And some of that mindset stuff that we want to work on in Sabatigo is about toughening your mindset and realizing when you just have to gut things out and when things that are super adverse feeling to you, instead of crushing you, help you channel this deeper thing that one of our lead disruptors, Dr. Paul G. Stoltz, is the world expert on grit and on adversity responses. And Paul's right. Adversity doesn't crush or kill emotionally, that is. People who are used to understanding that adversity is always going to be there. Instead, Adversity helps you train your body to jump over a higher hurdle. You start, the first time you're in high school or college trying to run over a hurdle, you're like, what in the heck? This thing, I'm going to trip on this thing every time. But as you get better, Paul is right. Your adversity response changes. So when Paul and I are working with our sabbatigoers in the streets of Paris, and we walk with them together down the cobblestones of the neighborhood called the Marais, and we circle around a specific set of streets centered around the Rue de Rosier, and we speak about the deportation of the Jews. This is something I've written a ton about and done a lot of scholarly research on as a historian. I've taught for decades in this environment. And when we're talking about the level of adversity and the crushing moral and human toll of the Second World War in France, the Holocaust, the occupation, and the deportations, and then Paul steps back and speaks in terms that are less about history and that are more about what human beings are capable of overcoming. We're going to finish one of those wonder walks, Milena, in front of a small bakery on the Rue de Rosier called Finkelstein and Sons, founded when? In 1946, right after the Second World War. That's an adversity response. And so when I talk about regeneration with sabbatical, that's about getting people back to good. The escalation and enrichment pieces are about giving people new fuel, not just for the first week or month when they're back home, but for years after, new fuel that burns differently. And that's about perspective and how life and lives can be made better by a new mindset. I hope that, didn't go on way too long, but, I have a lot of thoughts on this, having taught for so long.
No, you transferred me right in Paris. I was right there with you. This was awesome. Good storytelling. Why do you call your team members disruptors? I heard that term a few times and I love it.
Well, thanks. It's the term in business that's everywhere in the way that agile was, 5-7 years ago. So there's that. But the thing that I love about that term for us, that is not about the trendiness of the word, is, we're bringing people into the Sabatigo family who are just kind of intellectual gadflies. They are teasers. They prod and they push and they cajole, and they've got an edge to them. And they've got their massive research careers to back up the kind of hyperbole sometimes they'll lay down. I mean, our amazing disruptor, Dr. Natalie Nixon, who is just like Paul Stoltz, she's everywhere on LinkedIn and beyond. And Natalie's got this brilliance that Sabatigo adores her for, that transcends any of her specific ideas. But her specific ideas in the book that she's come out with just this year, The Creativity Leap, are like just beloved by everyone on our team. Why? Because Natalie, in that way a scholar can, who also runs her own business and does keynote addresses for big bucks all around the globe, Natalie plays with a simple concept that's highly disruptive. And her simple concept is that we as people who want to innovate and create, we have to toggle, as she says, constantly between two poles of getting things done. The one pole is about wonder and awe and consideration and reflection and, just really pondering deeply, what are we doing? What's the best way we can do what we're doing? And then Natalie does something that's not meant to be a smackdown to any generation, but is powerful. And what she does is she counterpoints wonder with rigor. And she really explains in her book how there's no amount of riffing, there's no amount of just saying that I'm going to do something great that will ever do something great. That wonder has to always be balanced very, very intentionally by rigor. And that's the thing that I think speaks so fluently and powerfully to, the startup nation of our moment right now. you know, where we have VC titans and amazing startup geniuses who are just throwing these dart ideas right down the field, and it's unbelievable. And yet, as great as many of those ideas may be, they have to always be balanced. Like if you're going to sail, you fly those beautiful sails on top of the yacht. They look great. Those are what everyone sees. Those are the colorful things that everybody on shore is like, wow, look at that. But without the keel underneath, or the centerboard in the case of my little 19-foot boat, without that counterpoint, there's no forward progress. The boat simply turns around and runs with the wind. And that's the only way it goes. And that, Milena, you and I both know that is not innovation. Just running with the wind is not going to get it done. And that's where Natalie as a disruptor is so phenomenal for us. Because she's about, yes, the sail is gorgeous, wonder and awe and super creativity. But the centerboard, the keel, that is what allows you to sail into the wind. Without it, you can't get it done. And I don't need to tell anybody else doing a startup, you're doing Unhustle, I'm doing Sabatigo. We have to remind ourselves, don't we? Sometimes we can't work as hard as our bodies will let us work, or you're not Unhustle and I'm not Sabatigo. We have to chill.
Absolutely.
So I really think there's some powerful stuff that's happening right now. And you know, we love our disruptors, and they are disruptive. If you tell people who've got great ideas that they actually are going to have to work, 10,000 hours on those ideas, it's not surprising that some people just say, like, I'm not going to do that. I want to do this for 3 years and I want somebody to buy me out for 50 million. And then I want to walk away and do this again. That's not going to happen for hardly anyone unless you're willing to do that rigor piece that's so a part of Natalie's argument. So thank you for asking.
I see Natalie's piece being taught somewhere where they're sailing, don't you?
Yes, let's do that. Let's all get on it. Let's all get on a yacht, Milena.
I don't know, like Tahoe, Baja, a couple of places come to mind.
We've talked about, you and I have spoken about the idea of doing a more accessible, shorter version of Sabatigo that could either be done as a kind of long weekend retreat. And you've had to kind of, along with some other very close advisors and friends, you've had to kind of, prod me and discuss this with me in different ways. But I'm really warming to this. And I'm warming to this because the need for regeneration is so huge. The need for escalation is just as big. And the reluctance on the part of our top C-suite bound, or they're already at the C-suite leaders, to take a week off of their paid vacation, let alone 2 weeks to come on something like Sabatigo. It's back to the 19th century stuff that I did my research on for my book, Milena. There's a sort of male, and now it's also, carried by women who are in the C-suite too. There's this, I'm too powerful and I'm too important to this organization, and I can't show the weakness needed, or I can't show any weakness that anyone could look at I'm taking 2 weeks off for my mental wellness. That looks like the kind of hero is crouching behind a curtain saying, don't look at the hero crouching behind the curtain. And so the more I think about some of these ideas we've discussed, the more I'm tuning into the idea that, yes, we want the Sabatigo journey to be the 2-week story. It's already a compressed version of a traditional sabbatical. But you and others like Mark Randall and Ruchika Sikri, who talked about this idea to me of having like power up weekends and regeneration escalation sessions that happen like in a great location. Tahoe, for example, your neck of the woods. I mean, this makes a ton of sense as long as Sabatigo can teach mindfulness like we're built to do, perspective like we're built to do, and innovation like we're built to do. The time frame on whether that's for 3 days or 2 weeks may in fact be less important as long as we can do good and do good work for people who need that help. So I'm tuning into you on this, Milena, and I appreciate your thought leadership.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll give you an example. I went out this morning on the lake on my paddleboard, and I was cruising, gliding through the water, and the sun was out. I had my dog with me on my paddleboard, and I was trying to come up with a subtitle for my book. And I've been, wrecking my brain trying to come up with something over the past one weekend here at the house. And all of a sudden, just the flow and the water and just the ease and the joy and the energy shifted my perspective. I came up with at least 3 titles. So there is power to connecting with nature in terms of regeneration. There is power in reconnecting with the universe. I love Europe. I am from Europe. I love the cities, as we talked. But there is also in terms of what you're trying to achieve, in terms of the innovation and exploration and the wonder and the wow and the awe. There is something to be said to being in a beautiful place, but I can't tell you what to do. I'm more than happy to do something with you, and maybe we can explore ways down the road. But perspective shifts can be done in a day, in an hour.
I think you really raise a great point with the paddleboard story, which, by the way, I wish I was out there with you and the dog. It sounds perfect. And you make me think of another one of our amazing disruptors, Dr. Max Frenzel, who's German but lives in Tokyo and has for a long time. And together with his business partner, they've got a business that's super akin to yours and ours. It's called Time Off. And Max happens to be one of these geniuses who can wear adeptly about 5 different hats, from theoretical physics to AI developer to beat and music generator, you name it. He's kind of a cultural artificial intelligence guru. But one of the things about Max's work, he kindly sent me a copy of his book, Time Off. And a little bit like the epiphany of reading Natalie, you read Max, and what's so amazing about his piece is he takes things down to an almost microscopic level, Milena, a little bit like you saying you can be transformed in a day or maybe even an hour. And Max has this beautiful piece that's about being a tourist in your own neighborhood and trying to create that discovery mindset and that growth and exploration kind of zealousness that we usually associate with, having jet lag and being in Reykjavik or wherever we might be in Tallinn. And Max really rightly says, why don't you try and dial that energy up for a walk around your neighborhood and, look up at the architecture, look down at the streets, think about how you're able to change your own mindset and have this sense of wonder, he says, even where you are most at home in your kind of quotidien life. So I'm on board with this. And I'm more and more on board with the idea of having our main piece of sabbatical be the 2-week journey, but offering 2 other kind of product lines or service lines that I think are important. And the first new service line we want to look at are these ideas of, weekend long retreats. They're huge and they can do a tremendous amount of good. And the second piece is more just, getting my amazing roster of disruptors who are already super high powered coaches to some of the biggest CEOs in the world and linking them up with the Sabatigo brand and diving into it myself and saying, I want to begin regeneration and escalation coaching work, perhaps, that's done in a virtual setting and then that culminates in some of these shorter sessions or culminates abroad in Europe in our longer 2-week format journey. So talking to all of you guys, from Max to Natalie, there's so many great ideas. You guys are like the funnest pot of people to swim with I could possibly think of.
Yeah, I think, I have that motto as well. I live in beautiful places, but sometimes you get a little, tired of the same beautiful place. So traveling like a local, living like a tourist is
Mhm.
always a good way to go about it, and just exploring, discovering. I never get tired of exploring this beautiful lake. I've been here 25 years and I'm still in awe every single day. you
Could I
know
ask you, could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I know because of the pandemic, you haven't been able to get home to your European family and your roots in such a long time. How is it going to feel for you connecting back with those people and those places that have been so like obviously foundational to who you are as a leader and a person? What are those first experiences of your own regenerative journey back to family and familiar places that are, that you've been removed from for so long? How is that going to feel for you when you get to make that journey before too much longer, Milena?
It's amazing. Great question. It's amazing to get back there. Every single time I get back there, I always say, we talk about shifting perspectives. It's the
Hmm.
best thing, because
Hmm.
it reminds me of who I am. I go back, I walk back on the same streets, I see the same things, I speak the language I grew up with. In terms of shifting perspective, travel for me is really key. Reconnecting with my family, reconnecting with my roots, with how I grew up, with just some traditions and rituals and practices, and anything that I grew up with is really, really good for me, spiritually good for my soul. But just it grounds me, and I make it a point to get back every few years. Right now, I can't tell you that I'm looking forward to being on a plane for 12 hours with a mask on. That
Yes.
does not sound good to me at the moment. My family really wants me to get back this summer. I'm turning 50 this summer. We really want to be together, even if it's not in Bulgaria. We were tossing ideas around, like, where can we go? Where can we go to get together? And we haven't made any plans yet. I'm not sure I'm interested in sitting 12 hours on a plane with a mask on at this stage. So it's key to my happiness. It's key to my knowing who I am and my identity, and regeneration from taking me out of the status quo a little bit.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to doing that as soon as possible.
Right. I get that. It's when I mean, I wasn't raised in Europe like you, but I've raised all four of my kids on regular rotations abroad. I've lived and traveled. I've even owned a little house over in Europe. So I've really. It's not just that I've spent a lot of time there, which I have. I've also spent some of the most like emotionally engaged and intensive like moments of my life there. And I think that's super sustaining and has been to me during COVID, when it's been one thing to like think about and talk about the sabbatical proposition, but it's been another thing to imagine like, when can this really happen? And how will this really be received by the world when we ask for it to happen? It's been really sustaining for me as a person to have these like emotional tentacles that go back to like literally specific tiny cafes in Paris, or particular streets in Prague, or like a statue I can think of in the Tiergarten of Berlin. Like, I get that maybe that sounds twee or um, just said to engage people emotionally. I understand that could be what one would think. But for me, those are like color combinations that I paint myself out of trouble with.
Mm-hmm.
And by trouble, I mean the kind of depressive claims that I'm sorry, life for pretty much most of us, maybe all of us, is going to make on us. There will be claims that are depressive that are made on our spirits. And you can't just constantly push those away. You have to figure out, in my experience, of how to engage with them, how to work with them, and how to talk myself through those times and those moments. And one of the things I do is I grab for that palette brush and those colors that are for me, not from my home place, not from where I was born and raised or went to college or grad school, but where I've like had this emotional other life. I mean, you speak a bunch of languages, Milena, and you speak them really, really well. Do you ever think that there's part of your emotional way of being or your even personal energy that's different when you're speaking in, you know, your normal mode of American English now versus any of the other language you speak? Is there a different way that you like arrive at yourself when you're in one of your other languages? Do you know what kind of what I'm asking you?
Completely.
Yeah.
I don't do well in Bulgarian,
Uh-huh.
which is probably why I left.
Interesting. Why do you think that is, and how? What is it? Is it what do you think you don't do well in that language? I'm really interested in that.
You know, I really don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
I really don't. I just it changes my energy. I mean, we can get a little woo here, but it definitely changes my energy. Bulgarians are very they're very resilient. We're very adaptable. I mean, you're a historian, you know, we've dealt with, you know, it's an old country. We've dealt with a lot of stuff. And I grew up during communism. So we're very, in terms of resilience and adaptable and tough, we're all these things. At the same time, you know, it used to be, I remember walking on the street as a kid, like people don't smile. If somebody smiles, you're like, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you smiling at? And but if it's just a different way of living, it's a different way of thinking, and I think that might be ingrained within me in the actual language, and it's just in my being. And so, going back to what you were talking about, though, in terms of painting that picture and going back mentally, that in a way is a little bit of it's a little bit of a shamanic hack and a spiritual hack, and that is like how you change your energy, right? How you go from being in that depressed and tired and exhausted mental space to more of a remember when, and you put yourself in that coffee in Paris, eating a croissant, and mentally transfer yourself there, and you can shift your energy really quickly that way. So that's probably why you're reflecting on that, but it's actually, it works.
Yeah,
It works well.
It is like for me, when I'm in France, and my French is basically like my tennis, my guitar playing, and my sailing. It's a comfortable version of mediocre, and it's a version of mediocre that allows me to like be myself. But what I love about I used to work a good bit with a fabulous professor from a small school in Texas named Dr. Lynn Hoggart. And Lynn wrote a lyrical, gorgeous piece. Her French is immaculate, and she's a professor of French, was for a long, long time. And Lynn wrote this just glorious kind of tribute to this notion that when you learn another language, you acquire like an opening to a part of yourself that you wouldn't have gotten into without that language. And it's not just go learn Portuguese, you're going to be a better, I mean, it's not as literal as that. It's more lyrical. And Lynn's argument is that just by trying to release the pressure and the energy to communicate in a language where you've got to work and you have to do these circumlocution workarounds to find the words or paint the picture of a simple sentence in a second or third language, you have this like wander through your own self and your own like linguistic tools that gives you a moment of aha. Like this is a sense of being me, Doug Mackaman, that without this language that I'm not great at, but I'm good enough at, I don't really have a full picture of who I am, who I've been, and who I'm just damn determined to become.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I make an argument about travel, it's not just, hey, let's go to France. It's beautiful. Let's go to Germany, see above. It's that I believe the power of who we are is unleashed every time you get to clank with some new keys and just put that key in and turn that, deadbolt, and suddenly, you breathe with a deeper chamber. You see with clearer eyes. You hear without that fog of like constantly having earbuds in.
Yeah.
And that's where a better version of you is waiting in that moment.
Yeah. 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 It's super fascinating to me, but different languages definitely, I was very interested in languages as a kid and wanted to learn. And to me, it opens up a whole new world. So you're definitely on point there.
Yeah.
Doug, I can talk to you for days, but I want to be respectful of your time. So where can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn as Douglas Mackaman, PhD, and I'm on LinkedIn with the business Sabatigo, the regeneration journey. And obviously look online for Sabatigo. Sabatigo.com is our URL, and we are super eager to be talking about this today with you, Milena. Thank you so very much for the chance to be on your fabulous podcast and to brainstorm with you. I am crazy about talking with you. So thank you.
I'm so excited we've connected and we're in each other's world. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for us both.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. All best, and we'll be in touch soon.